Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of the Book of Nook Show. My name is Kyle Colley, and this is a special episode of Author Talks Podcast, a podcast to hear the behind-the-scenes stories, ideas, and writings of authors. This episode is brought to you by Bookem, the book community's new and best way to host dynamic online book clubs. Download the app and start your book club today at www.bookemapp.com. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. My guest today is the witty Paul Scheer. Paul is the author of the New York Times bestselling book, Joyful Recollections of Trauma. He is also the co-host of two podcasts, How Did This Get Made and Unspooled. Paul has starred in hit shows such as The League, Black Monday, Fresh Off the Boat, and many more. He is a writer, a comedian, a producer, a collector, a storyteller, a husband, a father. He's hilarious, he's vulnerable, and he's honest. Paul, welcome to the Author Talks podcast.
I am so excited to be here. This is great. And I love that you kind of are doing something that's, I feel like, so important to do, which is like to find a community to talk about books, right? To have book clubs. It's so hard sometimes. You put together a book club locally, not everybody does the work. This is the future that we need. We need to be able to, like, yeah, you don't have to live in my hometown. I can get you somewhere else. Like, yeah, it facilitates a good conversation.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time today. And I do kind of want to start from one of my favorite shows, which is The
Yeah,
League. The
for sure.
cast, the humor, everything was so funny. So, do you actually play fantasy football in real time, or like, and if so, like, who's on your team, and how's your season going this year?
I do play fantasy football. I didn't really play fantasy football before I started doing the league, right? So it was actually one of the reasons why I didn't want to audition for the show. I had met with the creators, Jeff and Jackie, before the show kind of was announced. They were like, "We're working on a show. It's going to be like this," but they wouldn't tell us what the hook of it was. And then when I heard the hook was fantasy football, I was like, I don't know if I could do the show because I can improvise, but I don't know anything about fantasy football. I know football. And they're like, "Don't worry about it, just come on in." And I did, and then the rest is kind of history. So now I have been in multiple fantasy leagues. I think right now I'm on 5 fantasy leagues. So when
Yeah.
people say like who's on my team, I'm like, honestly, I don't know. Like it get like like I'm setting my lineups right before I got on here today. I'm like, oh God, I gotta look over here. Who's on the waiver wires? I think I'm excited about one team, but then I forget that player's not on that team. I'm having a mediocre season, I would say. I think it's probably because I'm on 5 different teams. I can't be that focused, but I'm a little bit over 500, which I think is an okay place to be because it didn't start strong, but now as the season progresses, my players are starting to kick in a little bit.
I'm good here. And how much of your like improv background kind of played into that? Because I feel like that show had a lot of just like off the cuff, funny things that are happening in real time.
Yeah, well, so the show, The League, was kind of created the same way that Curb Your Enthusiasm was
Yeah.
done. It was this idea where we were improvising, improvising off of a really strong like outline. And it was something like I wrote a bunch of outlines or episodes, I should say, for the show. But when you would sit down to write those outlines, you treated it like you were actually writing a script. You always wanted to make sure that when we got on set, we had something that was already funny. And what I think made the show so special was we were able to go off in tangents, but also we were also able to use our own voice and kind of pull out our own characters. And I think that that's like, we got to lean into what we knew we could do really well. So like the ability I was able to do like with Andre, I could find little moments that I thought, oh, would be good. And it's a lot of the times when you're working on a scripted show, you can add these little pops in, but that whole show is built around really being in control of your own character and having like two of the funniest people as the creators making it even better. So it was a great experience.
Yeah, the writing and just the conversations. I think that it was ahead of its time, and then also like it's still in the core time now. It's perfect still because how big fancy football has kind of got
Yeah.
since that show.
I feel like we did 7 years. They wanted us to do more, but we kind of got out at this one moment when football was, I feel like there was about 3 years there that were a little tricky in football, right? And now I think football is kind of turning around, like just in the societal issue. It's like,
Yeah.
so I feel like we kind of avoided a little bit of those sticky situations, I think, for the benefit of us. And now there's a part of me that's like, oh, I wish we could be doing it now because there's so much fun stuff going on in the NFL all around.
Yeah, and last question before we get in, sports question before we get into the book. You're a
Yeah.
Clippers fan, but you're from New York. Like, how did that happen? And how was the game last night? I seen that you
Oh yeah.
the new stadium and all that.
Yeah, so I grew up in New York. I grew up a Jets fan, right, which
No.
is tough, always tough. And I grew up a Knicks fan. But when I moved out to California, I knew that this is probably where I was going to be spending most of my time, and hopefully I would have kids at one point. And I didn't want my kid to be a fan of a team that he didn't grow up in the community of, right? That's such a part of like being a fan. Like I've talked to a lot of friends who are from New York or from different spots. I'm like, well, no, we're Phoenix Suns or we're this, we're Toronto. But I'm like, you got like I don't know. If I'm a kid, I want to be able to see my banners, my jerseys up. I want to feel like I'm in the culture of it. So when I came out here, look, the Knicks have been breaking my heart for years, right? And I love the Knicks. I'm a huge fan. But I was like, maybe it's time for me to invest in a different team. I don't want to just be able to go to like 2 games a year. So I kind of found the Clippers, and the Clippers at this interesting point where Doc Rivers is coming in, the team is changing its culture. Then finally we got Donald Sterling out and Steve Ballmer comes in, and it kind of culminates in the opening game at Intuit Dome, this just a couple days ago, which was an amazing experience. Like to have, to move, we were roommates for a long time with the Lakers, and now we
Yeah.
have our own place, and this place is state of the art. It's cashless. You just have your phone on you. They
Wow.
recognize your face, and you could take stuff off the shelves, merchandise, food, whatever it is. It is the future of stadiums, and I think what I love about that stadium, beyond the fact that I finally have a home for the Clippers, is while it's a brand new stadium and beautiful and top of the line, it's not overly expensive. And more importantly, it's built for a basketball fan. Like
Yeah.
they want you to get your food quick, they want you to go to the bathroom quick, they want you to be in your seats. Like it was the only time I've been there twice for games now where no one's in the hallways.
Oh
Like,
wow.
it's like people are in their seats. And I think that's where you want to be and that's what you want to be watching. So I feel like everything is geared towards that part of the experience, which I think is such a smart way to go.
And that wall is cool too.
Oh, the
Like,
wall is amazing. I mean,
yeah.
they're bringing basically a little bit of like a soccer energy into basketball, which we should be having. And I think it creates a culture. Like all of a sudden, all my friends were saying like, "Oh my gosh, it sounds so loud in there. It sounds so loud in there." I'm like, "It is. It's fun." But the thing is like, especially in LA, we're not like Philly. We're not like, we're LA needs to be told like to get up, to get involved, right? And I think that um I've used to see tons of concerts in New York, and LA concerts are different. They're too cool to be dancing. They're too cool to be out there. So I feel like what we need, like they're leading the crowd. We got cheerleaders out there. We have people out there that are keeping the energy going. People want to do it, but sometimes they don't know how to do it or when to do it or
Yeah.
and so I feel like that's the energy that we really need, and it really has been working.
I love to hear that. Let's talk about your book. How do you feel now that the book's been out for a little bit? People have gotten to process it,
Yeah.
see some of the stories, have gotten a chance to resonate with those stories. How do you feel about that part? And then were there any hesitancy to share some of these more vulnerable moments of your life?
When I took on writing this book, it was a really interesting process because the book originally came out of doing How Did This Get Made, which is a podcast I do with my wife and Jason Mantzoukas. And I would often tell these stories about my childhood. And I thought I was telling funny stories. And I'd look at Jason and June and they would be like almost horrified, like, whoa, whoa, wait, that's terrifying. And that's where the title came, Joyful Recollections of Trauma, because I would always tell something that was apparently very dark in a very happy way. And so that's what I started to do. I started to write those stories. And I realized very quickly, like in writing a book, it's not, you can't just do anecdotes. Anecdotes are great for dinner table, it's great for a conversation, but it's not what a book is about. You had to go deeper. And one of the best notes I got from my agent early on was just like, go deeper. And I realized early in the process, I don't have to pull myself back in from anything because I have the ultimate power in this. I'm not on stage, I'm not live. I can write this, I can rewrite this. So I wrote with reckless abandon. And really, where I started to finesse the book was in the editing of it, right? Oh, I want to say this, I don't want to say this. And what I was really conscious of throughout was I think that there's a version of this type of a book that's trauma dumping. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I want to be entertaining. I want to be able to tell you a story the way I would tell you, if you and I were out having dinner. So that was something I was putting in there. And they also wanted to be aware of I'm telling my story. I'm not telling the story of other people around me, right? And how can I keep that focus on me? Like so yes, I talk about my parents, I talk about June, but I'm telling my version of events not, and I'm not trying to analyze them. I'm not trying to build a story about them. And I felt like if I could keep true to that, it would be good. And I guess wrapping it all up and saying that I did feel like I'm okay with these stories. I knew that when that book went out, I was okay, but that was also because I looked at it through a microscope of going, my parents are alive, my kids might read this one day, my wife is here. Like, what can I say? What can I do that, is I think it's very revealing, it's very truthful, but there also are things that I'm never going to put in a book because that's also private. And I think that that's fine. It's just about finding that balance. And I think that, I've read some memoirs that don't have that balance, and it might be fun because it's voyeuristic. I've read some where I feel a little bit dirty reading that memoir because I'm like, oh, you've said too much. Like, you're not ready for it. And I think and then I've read some where they don't go deep at all. So I tried to find that middle ground of being like honest, true, and deep, but also protecting the stuff that I know should be protected because of the people in my life. And I think that that's the right way to go about it.
That's well said. And to that point on balance, how do you balance that openness while also keeping a certain level of your, life private and all that?
I think for me, there are certain things I'm very comfortable talking about. And then there are certain things in this book where I am talking about dark things. And I think there's a want as a like somebody who does comedy to kind of like move on quick. Like don't get up nervous about it. Because I feel like whenever you know, whenever I'm talking to somebody, if I tell them these stories that may be in the book, I can almost feel their buttholes clench in a way, right? It's like, oh, they want to say something, they want to do something, they want to make it better. And writing a book was a really amazing experience because I know as a storyteller how I'm going to tell the story. I'm not going to weight you down, but I can also then not have the worry about you interrupting me or me reading your face like, oh, this person doesn't like it. I got to change it or I got to go over here. So it allowed me to be in control as a storyteller and tell a story that was honest and truthful. And look, there are just certain things, like I said, like I'm very open with my life. Um, but there are some things if I'm still dealing with them that I'm probably not going to put on paper. Maybe if I write another book, I get to a different point in my life. I'm like, oh, I can tackle this. But
Yeah.
I didn't. Nothing was off limits, and I didn't pull anything out. It was just sort of like the book. And I know it sounds silly to say, but the book kind of just came out. Like I was ping ponging. Like I wrote one chapter, and oh, I want to write this, and then I would write this. So the book kind of informed what it wanted to be. And when I got to the end of it, I saw what the book was, and I was like, okay, these things don't necessarily fit in this narrative, so I can pull them out. And that's really how I edited the book. Besides being respectful of the people in my life. Um, but that's what I did. I just kind of jettisoned things that didn't fit thematically what I thought I was trying to do.
And I gotta give you your props because I was listening to the other podcast where you were first explaining some of the things that are coming around
Yeah.
that kind of spun it into this book. And the accuracy of kind of what you were talking about then till now is that you were able to put a lot of your thoughts into the book in a very powerful way.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I think the one thing I wish I would have known earlier was how important the editing process is. Like I spent so much time with having the whole book in front of me, moving stuff around, I thought when I started writing the book, I knew certain things about myself, and I did, but I found out even more
Yeah.
about myself through writing the book. And then I was able to make connections that I didn't even see until they were on the page, right? So, allowing yourself, and this is a lesson I've gotten when I was writing comic books, and it works to this too. It's like, don't let anyone rush your editing process. That's a really important chance for you to look and see because it's, a lot of the times when you're writing, you're looking at like, I'm writing this chapter. I'm looking at these first 50 pages. I'm looking at this last 20 pages. You're looking at books as an isolated piece. And when people are reading it, they're reading it as a full piece. And you have to
Yeah.
put yourself in that position and really look at the full piece. And I feel like there's an energy always everywhere to be like, just get it done, hand it in, get it done, get it done, get it done. And you really have to take control there and be responsible and also make sure that you are like you're the only person at the end of the day you're the only person who cares like and I don't mean that I had great people who worked around me but if I said something if I was like man I talked to Kyle one time and Kyle's a real jerk right like I could say like I would there was a part of me that would be like oh yeah I meant that and I wrote it but then there's but and no one would say don't write that about Kyle but I have to say like, oh, you know what? Do I want that out there forever? Like, and you have to like balance that. Like who,
Yeah.
it's like, and because there might be something in anger that you write that you feel like, yeah, but you're like, it's locked. You can't change it. You can't go back. And I feel like that's sometimes people, you can tell like when people do these pull quotes from books, like, oh, they didn't think about that too much. They didn't know that that was going to be like the headline of People magazine. Like that's the pull quote. The book is distilled to one thought. And that's, that's the things I feel like people don't tell you. And I was talking to a friend who was writing a book the other day. I'm like, just make sure that you're comfortable with it. I can stand by anything in my book, and that's how I like was able to release it.
Well, that's good advice. And we talk about that a lot on this podcast. Like, what's most personal is most general. And
Yeah,
just like when you tell these stories, people go, oh, I can relate. Or even to the point where we'll talk about it too. Like, there's this idea of people hurt people. And you dive into your relationship with your stepdad, Hunter.
yeah.
I guess the question becomes, how did you process some of those difficult memories? And like, as you kind of grown as a father yourself, how have you been able to use those memories to better raise your own kids?
Well, no, that's a great question. I think what you're saying to a certain extent is really the theme of the book. How do you go from being a kid who's in an abusive relationship with a father figure and then have to make this transition to become a father? And the book it's happening outside the book in a way, right? The book is I always say the book is like a reflection of therapy and work. And I'm not saying everyone has to do therapy. I'm not saying everyone has to do but I do think everyone needs to do some self-reflection. However that comes. If that comes from you taking a long walk, great. If that comes from you meditating, perfect. Therapy, whatever it is, but you have to analyze yourself because I think that what I was able to do was bring a lot of work that I've done since my early 20s into my 40s into this book and issues that I've had and I've talked about. Like it's not just the book isn't just a conversation with me. It's really a recalling of conversations and emotions that I've dealt with. And I think you're totally right about this idea of look, the book is called Joyful Recollections of Trauma. But it's trauma is the fire in which we are all forged in the sense that whatever your trauma is real and true to you. I don't have to have the same, but I can identify with it. Whether it's like I read Paris Hilton's book and there's a section in there about the school that she went to, this boarding school. I didn't have any experience like that, but I can empathize with it and we can all find it. And one of the most amazing things about this book for me was talking to people, going to these signings, meeting people, because what people got out of the book is completely unique to them. My journey about being a dad was fraught with a lot of different things. I think that, when you are coming out of an abusive relationship, there's a fear that you might pass it along, right? You might
Yeah.
be this person. And I think that if I didn't do the work on myself that I did, I probably would have become that. I don't I often say I don't think I could have written this book until I had kids because one of the things that really helped me in my journey was not only empathy for my parents in living through this as well and what the tools that they had, but empathy for myself. I think that like a lot of the times it may not be like easily articulated, but we all feel a guilt about the trauma that has happened to us. Like, what did I do to
Yeah.
deserve this? Did I bring this on myself? Could I have done? And I think that being a parent is really all about empathy and understanding and listening. So that helped me write this book because it was a perspective I've never had before.
That's well said. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because you brought it up, that hope like outbursts that
Yeah,
you had as a child.
yeah,
How are you able to process that as an adult? Do you still have that, or does it
yeah.
manifest in different ways?
Well, in dealing with my stepfather, there was the way that I could win, because as a kid was through violence, right? I could fight back. And what I slowly started to realize was that violence started to eke into a lot of things. At school, I'm getting into fights. I'm quick to anger. And it got to a point where I was fighting or getting into fights. And I realized that I was like, well, I'm becoming the monster. Like we already had left the situation at that point, but it still was like a part of me. My anger was my first defense. Whenever I felt attacked, it would go to anger. And my initial response was like, I got to turn that off. I just got to turn. I can't be angry. As a matter of fact, I don't want to rock the boat. I'm gonna make a 180 here and try to be something completely different. And that wasn't good either, because then I'm not being true to myself. So part of the journey for me was understanding that anger is a good thing. Anger is something, it's like salt, right? It needs to be used in recipes, but you don't want to, you're not putting a cup of it in. You're using it, at certain points more or less. And I feel like that, to me, it wasn't about like losing anger, or it was about controlling it. Like, how can I can go up to 10 if I need to, but I am in control of going up to 10. Whereas before, my immediate response was, I'm at a 10. And 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 it's okay to have emotions and be true to myself. And that's something that, again, is, I think, a hard fought lesson, because I got lucky in seeing myself as the villain early on. And I'm glad that I did. I didn't know how to deal with that. I just tried to make a 180, like I said, and that wasn't right. And it wasn't until I really went to therapy and someone was able to, I call it out for me, like I was hiding this anger, that it really started to make me think about that and open myself up to being angry, because I was so afraid of even allowing that out in even a small amount, that I couldn't even really reconcile with it.
You said something really well said in the book. You talked about if you survived, you were fine.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, like how do you reflect on that idea now as an adult? Because I think that is so relatable just to different people that have gone through so many things.
Well, I think that I'll just talk from my, like, I'm in my 40s. My parents and their parents probably parented very similarly, in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But the difference in which I parent versus my parents is giant. I have access to so much more stuff. Not even as who I am. I mean, just the internet or whatever, right? They'd be able to connect with communities. So, I think that there was a mentality with my parents' generation of, if it's not broken, you're fine, right? If you didn't, it didn't happen, so don't worry about it. It was almost like emotions were slightly devalued. And I think this is like kind of an issue that upsets people about, like, quote unquote, like woke culture. Like, woke culture is such a weird thing, because what we're saying is like, oh, we're just listening to people, and we're acknowledging that our like, that we have the power to hurt people, or that, like that we need to respect other people's ways of being, right? And it's like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be woke. And it's like, that's really the reaction to it. It's like, I don't want to respect it because it's hard for me to respect it, and that's really what I think, that's the difference. I'm trying to, like, it's like, I'm trying to say, like, hey, yeah, no bones were broken. Maybe it would have been better if they were, because maybe I would have gotten a treatment, or somebody would have looked in, right? But because no bones are broken, it doesn't mean that I'm not carrying a weight, a fear, an anxiety. But because, those are harder things to see, and they're harder things to deal with. I think one of the things I'm trying to do as a parent is center my children instead of myself when they're upset. It's not about like where I'm at. It's about where they're at. Why are you acting this way? What's going on? They're not saying that they can articulate it great, but like at least giving them an outlet. Like, my son did something so stupid. He was dared by his friends to pour some water on this bouncy castle engine, right? And he did it. Now my son, he's 8 years old, probably was 7 when he did this, and the bouncy castle collapsed, trapping these kids on the inside. They were fine, and nothing. It was just like enough people were. It was a slow deflate, so kids were able to get out. And he felt terrible about it. And I think that in my generation, I would have been, my parents were like, "What did you do? You don't do that. Go, go, go. You yell. Go to your room. You're punished." And look, that's fine on a certain level, but it's also like, but was my kid like learning anything from that? Like, you have to be like, well, wait, first of all, why did you do it? Okay, I'm gonna hear that out. Maybe he won't know, but I'm also gonna say, like, you can't do that. You can't, like, I need to, like, because I know that I shut off. Like, once people start yelling at me, I'm like, oh no, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad, right? And it's like, and I think I'm trying to create kids that I'm trying to hear what they're doing. I'm trying to see their point of view, because they're not, my kid wasn't trying to hurt another kid. My kid wasn't trying to do something bad. He thought he was doing something funny. And like, how do you get in front of it? So it's like listening to them, not just going with your gut instinct, like, yes, I'm upset my kid did this, I'm embarrassed, but I have to also respect, who they are, and listen to them.
And I noticed that you broke the book into Old Testament and New Testament, and you talked a little bit about how faith kind of played into your upbringing. Like, how did that experience shape your views of faith and kind of just like I know you talked about your stepdad
Yeah,
being born again Christian,
yeah.
all yeah.
Look, I think faith is such an important part of life. Um, but I also think that faith shouldn't replace your own judgment, right? I think that sometimes the most spiritual people I've met can think for themselves. I think that sometimes when positioned poorly, faith can be like, these are the rules. And we all want a life instruction book, right? We all want to be like, this is how I act. And I think on the surface level, like whatever religion you subscribe to provides very basic ways of acting. Like no religion's like go out
Yeah.
there and hurt people, right? They and I think where you get into these moments is when they become when it takes you out of the equation, so I believe I am a faithful person. I am a person who believes in spirituality and religion, and maybe it's not as clearly defined, or maybe it's not that easy, but there's a part of me that feels like a great example of it, I guess, would be sometimes it comes up with abortion and things of that nature. It's like, well, we we're Catholic, and I grew up Catholic, and it was like abortion is wrong, and right, and it's like, and by the way, that's great. That's what you believe, and that's fine. Everyone, I'm not saying you should change your opinion, but why do you believe that? Well, you believe that because of all these other tenets, right? Like we have to protect life, we have to help people, but then when you have these voters, there's like, well, I'm only voting on that. It's like, well, but you got to look at the whole holistically, though. What are we voting on, right? It's like in that, and I feel like that's where faith gets a little tricky. Like people can get like just very focused on things. So to me, I try to be a little bit more active in my faith, and like I can be faithful. I can think about things. I can have discussions because I think everything that I grew up learning, like the real lesson was questioning and asking questions and looking at yourself and not just following a leader. It was like about, so I'm trying to find that faith and community and building that out, and I want to build that in my kids' lives. And sometimes I think some churches, some organized religions can kind of take away that sense of self, and that's what I just want to protect against.
Yeah, I want to get into some of the comedic because there's a lot of humor in
Yeah.
this book
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
How do comedians have to draw from like a darker past to like really? 'Cause I feel like a lot of times
Yeah.
comedians, at least the ones I've ran into, they have like these kind of darker sides that end up bringing allows them to have a sense of laughter and humor for the world that some people can't even draw from. So, do you think a lot of comedians have that too?
I think that there's a sense of when shit's tough, right? It's like we want to laugh, right? And as a kid, you want to break up that thing, right? If like, okay, my parents are fighting, I'll be funny. I want to ease it out. There's a part of it where you're placating. It's like I said that like I don't want to rock the boat. That's why I kind of turned off my anger, right? But there's another side of that too, which is like I want to make everybody feel good and comfortable. I think that comedians and performers, that's what they do on some level. It's like I want to make it all good. Like let's bring everybody in. Let's change the energy, the attitude. I don't think that trauma is like I think like I said, I think everybody has something that activates that. I think that there's a unique point of view when you've gone through something traumatic because you got to laugh at it, right? That's people say, you got to laugh at it. Like at a certain point it's like this is, and that's the only thing that you have in these dark moments. And I think that what allows people to do is look at dark things with a funny twist, right? Because we've been there before. And I think that a lot of people, I mean, I think everybody does that on some level, right? It's why like when you watch a drama, sometimes I laugh harder in a light moment in a drama than I will in a comedy because it's like it's a
Yeah.
release. So yeah, I think on some level it's like, oh, we've been training ourselves to be this person our whole lives. Um, but I also think there's probably a form of validation through that. Like maybe I'm not getting validated here. I'm not feeling like I'm worthy of anything. I'm feeling like no one will pay attention to me, so I need to make myself special. And there's something like you could say for like anything where it's performative based, like, oh yeah, you're amazing at football, you're amazing at basketball. It's like I'm doing something so it's undeniable, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
not, maybe on some level you feel like I'm not getting that love that I deserve, or people aren't recognizing me. So if I can run the fastest, if I can swim, the longest, whatever it is, it's like I'm giving you something that is proof based. Like you can't deny this. I am very good at this, and that's why you will love me. I am funny. I am a good, and so I think that there is, a want of love. I mean, I think that that's what a lot of performers want is attention. It's like I think that people are like construe it with we want validation, but I think it's a different reason why. It's like that's how we got validation because we weren't
Yeah.
getting it through that other way.
Are there things you just don't touch in comedy because of trauma that you have there, or do you just you just go with the flow and what happens happens?
Look, there's definitely things. I think it's about how you approach things, right? I mean, there's the very cliche way of saying it is like don't punch down, right? Like there, and I think that's probably the best lesson. I think that you can talk about anything as long as you are respectful and have a point of view that is sound. Like the person I always go to about this is Bill Burr, because Bill Burr will say some things where you're like, "Whoa, I do not agree with that," right? And then he will spend 20 minutes deconstructing why he believes that. And now part of it is the journey. I don't even know if he believes it, but it's like a debate team. It's like, here's the premise. I'm going to try to prove to you why this premise is right. But it's well thought out. It's not lazy. And at the end of the day, you might go, well, I don't agree with you, but that was funny the way that you got there. And you did poke holes in what I thought, So for me, it's I think that laziness look, I do a podcast called How Did This Get Made? We make fun of bad movies. There's a version of that podcast where we could sit there and be like, screw this actor, that person's terrible. We don't really do that. Like we're actors ourselves. Like we're embracing different things. We're making fun of it, but we're bringing people into it instead of you know elevating ourselves above it. It's like, and so I do think everything is on the table as long as you're smart and funny about it. And I think where people get into trouble is when they do something that is just not well thought out, or they don't have a point of view. Because if you have a point of view that you can defend, that means that you've at least thought about it. And I think a lot of people just don't think about it. They go, that's weird, that's odd, that's and that's where we get into trouble, because it's like it's just it becomes something that is like lazy comedy to me is the death of good comedy. It might get a laugh, but I don't think it stands the test of time.
I agree. How does the collaborative, like off the cuff nature of improv compare to when you're doing the podcasting? Because you were just talking a little about
Yeah.
podcasts. I'm curious about that too.
Well, for me, improv is really just listening and reacting. Like we're improvising right now, right? We're improvising every day in our life, right? You walk out on the street, you go to your car, you bump into something weird, you have an interaction, you react to it, right? Improv is just capturing that on stage. We're reacting, we're playing out a moment. And that's, and I think good podcasting is capturing a conversation that you like. It's not as performative. Like you and I are talking right now. Yes, you're interviewing me and I'm answering these questions, but we're listening to each other and we're responding, and like I don't know, which way it's going to go. And I feel like a great podcast is having that ebb and flow. It's not going like I may say, all right, I have these things I want to say about this movie, but the minute we go away from that, I should follow that path, and we're going down that road. And then if there's a moment later on, we go back to it. But that's like that's I think the trick is like, do you allow yourself? It's like enough like rope, like can I get like it's like it's you can go down, you're like, okay, yeah, we're gonna go over here, and I know that eventually I can come back to it, but I'm not gonna derail it or go off in a different direction. There's an old adage with improv where it's like yes and, right? And I think in everything is yes and. I think that that's in work environments, I think that that's in creative environments, but in podcasting it's like yes and, not no but. And I think that like, and if we can kind of instill that, and not just be trying to get our next thing out, we're better off for it.
And one of the cool things I enjoyed, I listened to the audio side of the book.
Yeah, yeah,
You brought in parts of the live podcast and all that. What
yeah.
made you do that? I thought that was really unique. Nobody usually does that.
For me, I'm a huge audiobook fan. I listen to tons of audiobooks. Um, it's so I wanted to create an experience that I think felt different and interesting. And because this book was uh like born out of my podcast, and there were stories that I told on the podcast, I thought it would be a really interesting companion piece. Like, how can I can even show you an element of a story that I told on the show, and you can almost see the anecdote version of it, and then you can actually hear it the other way. Like, because some of those stories I'm telling for the first time. I didn't write those stories down before the show and go, oh, this is a story I'm going to tell about going into New York City to go see a naked lady. Like, I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. How did that go? And it's right. So that to me is, um, that's what I really loved about kind of showing, like, not the before and after, but just kind of showing how this is all part of this is all part of a bigger piece.
Let's talk a little bit about the art of the bit, because I like what makes a great bit. Like, how do you know when a bit has, yeah, like what
Yeah.
makes a good bit in general?
Look, I think that an audience will always tell you what a great bit is too. You hear a reaction. You know, I'm a big believer in play play for you. You're the audience, right? If it makes you laugh, it probably will make somebody else laugh. Back to what you said earlier about, like, hurt people, but like pain is universal, right? But if you're laughing, if you're having fun, people are going to find that infectious. I think when you're trying to, like, land a joke, it feels inauthentic. One of the first things I ever saw that was so great when I moved out to LA is I saw Patton Oswalt talk about Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, and I watched him break down this movie. He's like, I just saw this movie. Let me tell you what this is about. And I was like, oh my God, this is the funniest thing I've ever saw. And the way he told it, it felt like he was saying it for the first time. I saw him 2 nights later doing the same exact material, right? And I was like, oh, I felt like a doofus. I've seen stand up my whole life, right? I wasn't new to stand up, but that kind of thing is like making people feel like it's an organic moment. So for me, audiences will tell you what a good bit is. People will tell you what a good bit is, but it's often it's reading the room. It's like, all right, I know I'm on a thing. If I'll do things with June or Jason on the podcast, and if I see them laughing, I'll lean into it, right? If I hear the audience laughing, I'll lean into it. So and so to me, it's like I think that there's like two levels of doing any sort of comedy. One is like you test it out. Is this something? Oh yeah, I like that. How about this? And you kind of build on it, and it's a little bit like it's like trying to get like a shy, like it's like you're like a shy dog. You're coming in, you're like, hey, what's up here? Okay, I'm coming. You're getting more and more comfortable as you go in, and sometimes you'll do something. People are like, what? I mean, I have a whole thing. I'm like, I think the funniest thing is never translates to anybody, but I think it's funny. It's not worked, and I have to learn not to never to ever do it again. But I think it's such a funny bit. Like, you ever see those M&M's commercials where it's like the two talking M&M's,
Yeah.
and I'm like, but they're standing in front of a bowl of other M&Ms that are not that don't have feet, that don't have eyes. And I'm like, what's going on there? Is that like, are those aborted M&Ms? Are those dead M&Ms? Like, what? And I'm just always trying to break down like what this logic of this world is, where the M&Ms are watching people eat handfuls of M&Ms in the background. I'm like, what is, and it's like, I can't make that into a bit. If I tell it to you, like, this is the best way it ever works, is like if I can explain it, where I really like lay it out like that. But it's like I don't know what makes me laugh about that. But there's some bits, like I wrote a bit for Human Giant that I loved, which is a sketch show I did with Aziz Ansari and Rob Hubel. Um, and it was the idea, like, there's like a genie, like you got a magical genie, and you rub the genie, and the premise of the sketch I wrote was, oh, I got this genie, but he's broken. It just never worked. Like, I bought it from the store and the genie never works. And it's like I asked for a hat and he gets me a cat, whatever it is. And we couldn't really break down that thing of like, oh yeah, it's like I talked about it like on NordiTrack or something. It's like, oh, I bought this genie head. It just but I can't use it anymore. But because of that idea, Eric, oh, okay, I guess, sure, sure, sure. And then it became the sketch called Meth Genie, where I got a genie, but he became addicted to meth. And so it was like basically I had like a crackhead genie, and the genie was doing all this weird shit around the house. And then that became like, and that's kind of, I think that's the fun of the collaboration of it all. It's like, all right, I have an idea for a bit, but when you work with other people, they can kind of make it better too.
Yeah, and even with the Eminem, it's always funny when people bring the unconscious or what we might have thought of but never really
Yeah.
verbalize it to the conscious mind or to the audience.
Yeah.
That's what always makes it funny too.
Yeah, and I think, part of it's like, I think one of the things about it that's fun and what I always say to people is like, don't stop. If you are a performer, you can't stop performing and you can't stop seeking out new stuff. You might feel like the culture has passed you by. You might feel like, oh, I don't know if this is hip or funny, but you got to get up there. And one of the things I love about still performing, pretty much weekly is I'm always putting myself in front of an audience, right? And so, yeah, sometimes I'll eat shit, sometimes I won't. But it's like it's trying, and it's like, but the minute you get precious about trying is the minute that I think you start to lose that edge and that spark. Because I think all of comedy, all of doing a good bit, is testing out a lot of bits and going, oh, is this something? A writer's room. It's like you're in a writer. What about this? What about this? What about this? And that's why I think it's so important in a writer's room to go back to that theory of yes anding. Let's
Yeah.
say yes and, not no but. Like when you start to say no, that thing won't work because X, Y, and Z. It's like no, no. Like there's a rule that the Hanna-Barbera had. That you could never say no to any of the cartoon ideas. They knew that the best ideas would rise to the top and the bad ideas would kind of just go away. And we spend so much time saying no, like let those moments of pure creativity just be yes and make somebody's idea better. And if you make somebody's idea better, you're going to feel better at the end of the day instead of just being like, oh, we got nothing. It's like, yeah, because you didn't, every time you're like, let's drive down this road, you drive down that road for half a mile and go, oh, let's turn back. It's like, well, you're never gonna get anywhere. You're just gonna keep on going back and forth, and it's gonna be, and you're never gonna move forward.
Yeah, speaking of performance, do you have a favorite memory from those UCB days? And didn't you like work with Amy Poehler and a lot of different people
Oh
coming up?
yeah. So I came up in the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater. The UCB was Amy Poehler, Matt Besser, Matt Walsh, and Ian Roberts. And now, when they first started performing in New York City, it was on a fifth floor walk up on 17th Street in New York City above an old hardware store, right? And they were in a theater that probably sat 50 people, and they would do an improv show. And the improv show is amazing. It blew my mind. It's what got me into doing like this long form improv. And what I didn't realize at the time was, yes, I was watching those UCB4. They were not famous,
Yeah.
but who was next to them? Oh, people like Adam McKay and Tina Fey and Rachel Dratch and people like some of the biggest writers even too. Like you start to see all these amazing people just performing and playing and having fun. I think culturally too, that's coming back in a major way. Like when we talk about like escape rooms and things like that, people want to be in interactive environments. But not to get off topic, there were so many amazing moments in those early days of UCB, and I think a lot of it was, well, I can bring up one that I thought was really fun for me. I used to do this fake talk show called Talk Show, where I used to play like an Ed McMahon character called J. Montgomery Scott. And we would book real guests, like a real talk show. And I remember we booked Tenacious D. This may even be in
Wow.
the book. We booked Tenacious D to be in the show, but we didn't tell anybody. And then all of a sudden, we're like, all right, our first guest tonight, Tenacious D. And they were at the point where Tenacious D was like they were
Yeah.
exploding. Like they were playing large venues, but they were in UCB and people just saw it. And that was like a magical night. Like Mike Myers jumped up on stage with a Robin Williams would jump up on stage, right? Right. You would get these moments where it was New York, it was hip, it was cool, and people just wanted to play. And that to me, like there's so many moments, and at one point someone will write a history of UCB. And what I was trying to do in my chapter when I talk about UCB was kind of explore a little bit of it. But I realized also my experience of UCB is so singular to me. One of the cool things about UCB was there were so many performers having very individual experiences, but the one thing that brings us all together was we were a place where cool things were happening with the funniest people in the city. And for that like period of 5 years, it was this explosion of talent and shows and just performances that you would like that are burned in my brain and may not even translate to be the funniest things, but it's the hardest I've ever laughed. I watched a sketch with two people basically just saying the name Jay Leno for 4 minutes. And it's the hardest I've ever laughed in my entire life. I like it, like right, like, but it's like it's just being there and feeling like you've seen something so wholly unique.
It's so interesting when you read biographies because everybody always had, or at least when you read certain biographies, people always have these weird run-ins with unique people at certain times, like before they've gotten big, and
Yeah,
you kind of use that as like a horizontal collaboration as you continue to grow. So all those
yeah,
people you still were working with too.
yeah. That's one of the best things about my back. Well, one of the best things about improv is you're building together, right? So stand up is very different. Like you're up on stage, you can go on the road by yourself. You don't need anybody else. I need other people to improvise with. I want to have those people. So it is a collective of people where I think in comedy, I know, like in my type of comedy, not stand up, but in my world of comedy, I think I would say I know about 85% of the people currently in comedy because we're all 1 degree of separation away from each other. It was actually really interesting because I did a show that Ben Stiller produced. We did it to raise money for Haiti. It was about like, we just did a night called 100, the night of 140 tweets. We had,
Okay.
this is back when Twitter was first popular. We had a bunch of people come out on stage and read 1 tweet each. And we had like everybody from Will Ferrell to Demi Moore and this wild grouping of people. But we had 140 performers. And I remember it was interesting because we had the cast of Always Sunny there. And I love those guys and I knew them from doing the league, but they didn't know anyone in the room because they kind of came up outside of the comedy world. They're doing something so incredibly funny, but they're not like in the comedy world. And that kind of thing is so rare. I would say that every major comedy show, it has the DNA in this like Second City UCB Improv Olympic, Groundlings world that we all kind of traverse in. And it's like I may not know that person 100%, but I'm good friends with one of their good friends, right? So it's like it's only a phone call away, which I think also allows us not to hire people who are assholes, right? Because like, how is that person? Oh, they're great. Okay, great.
Exactly. Yep. One of my favorite stories in the book, and we have a lot of people that listen to us enjoy rom-coms and romance stories.
Yeah.
So, can you tell that story about how you first met? And because it seemed like you fell in love with June first. Like, when did she fall in love with you?
It was interesting because June and I were coming out of relationships. We've both been in long relationships. And I think that there was two things at play. One, I wasn't looking to be in a relationship. And I think when you're not looking to be in a relationship, it's the best because you're not really on your best behavior. I feel like with June, I was like, I don't know if I'll ever see this girl again. And so we were having lunch because we were talking about a show that she was doing. And I just was like very honest about where I was at. And I think because I was so honest, she was honest. I was like, this is where I am right now. I'm like kind of depressed. I'm a little bit fucked up, but I'm also like, I'm. That's where I am. And she was also in a similar state. And so it started our relationship off in this like really not like I won't say brutal honesty, but just like we weren't trying to be anything that we're not. I think a lot of times in relationships, when you meet people, you're like, I'm this person, I'm that, and then it takes a while to be like, well, no, I'm actually this person. Um, so June and I really had this thing where it was like, I like this girl, like she's cool, she's different, but I also had that other energy of like, I just got out of a relationship, I can't be getting involved in anything. But I kept on finding myself like kind of drawn to her, and she would be drawn to me, but we would never really connect. It was a lot of these misconnections. We were just, she'd text me late, I would be out, or we were gonna have a date, and then she got too drunk at a Christmas party, and we didn't have our date. So it was just and it was like, oh, maybe this will never be like, but even if it wouldn't be, I was like, I wanted to have this person in my life. I don't know what it was. It was just something, and maybe it was just because I found myself being someone who I wasn't with anybody else with her.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what unfortunately kind of unfolds is when we finally do get together to have this date, it's going really, really well. But because it's also like our first kind of date, we also were protecting ourselves. So we invited like our friends to kind of like, oh, come out, we'll all go out. So it's not like a pressure on a date. Now, that was something we decided before the date started. We were gonna have like dinner, then meet up with them. But we had dinner and it's going really good. So now it's like, oh shit, get these friends out of here, but it's too late. They're already coming in. Like we already called in the reinforcements. And we didn't really have a chance to like kind of communicate with them where we were at. And so our friends sort of became our surrogates, right? They were like kind of backdooring deals for us. Like, does she like him? Does he like her? And I think that they were trying so hard to protect us that, like I didn't put this in the book, but they this like I didn't know how to put this in the book, but there's this whole story there where my friend comes up to me in this bar after June and I've had this amazing night. We had this great dinner. We went out dancing. We're having the best time. My friend's like, dude, she only likes you as a friend. And I was like, oh, and I just got crushed. I was just like I couldn't have sunk lower, like from such a high to such a low. And I made this decision in that moment, like, well, fuck it. Who cares? I like this person. I'm gonna just keep on just being who I am. We're not that we're just having a good time anyway. Like if she doesn't like me, that's fine. Now, what I didn't know was while my friend is telling me that, her friend is telling her the same thing. So now we both are sticking around, but we're both giving off these like I'm like, why is she so? She seems like she likes me, but my friend said she doesn't, and I think June's been like, he seems like he likes me, but like so we don't know, so we're really circling around each other. And there was this moment where the night was over, they closed up this bar, and I was like, I'm gonna go. And it was like in my mind, I was like, I'll never see this person again. But it was fun while it lasted. I was I called her a cab. I hailed a cab, and she's like, no, I'm gonna walk. And I was like, you know what? I'll walk you. And I'm so happy that I did because I sent that cab off and we walked across town. And then we had this like beautiful walk. And it kind of brought us back to that dinner, that moment. And that's when we had our first kiss, which I think then really confused the hell out of us because we were like, I don't know what's going on. Wait a second. I know that he doesn't like. So we were both working under false pretenses because we both thought that each other said we don't like each other, but yet we kept on engaging with each other. So it took us a little bit of time to kind of figure out what was what. But once we did, we've been inseparable since.
Yeah, because in the book it doesn't say like
Right.
why did your friends say that? Like why are
You
they
know, yeah, it was. I was gonna put like a little like postscript there at one point to explain it, but I think the thing was my friends weren't trying to be bad, right? They were
okay.
trying to protect. And when you're in your 20s, and maybe it's different now. I'm old. I've been with my wife for a long time. I don't know how it works, but I think the worst thing you ever wanted to do is feel like, oh, he likes you and you don't like him. Like your friends are trying to look out for you and be like, oh no, 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 yeah, he likes his like they weren't they weren't trying to sabotage it, but I think my friend, and this is so hard to explain, and I think this part of it was too, is trying to put this in the book, but my friend was reading her friend, and
Oh, okay.
because she was hedging, he was like, yeah, as a friend, and she was hedging. So they both were hedging with each other, and they both like they made this decision to protect us because they were both misreading what each other were saying. So it was like, oh, like like it wasn't ill will. It wasn't like they were trying to like pull us apart. They just were trying to protect us, but they didn't need to. They like, they were getting involved, and that's why I'm like, I leave people alone. I'm not gonna set you up on a blind date. I don't care. Like, go do your thing. I realized as I gotten older, like, I don't need to set anybody up on blind dates. I don't need to be invested in anybody's relationship. Do your thing. Don't do your thing. I'm out. That's it.
Yeah. That's good. I want to just as we start to wrap up, can you talk about some of those? I know you have a lot of funny celebrity stories. Like, do you
Yeah.
have any stories where fans were kind of awkward to you? Because you tell
Oh,
talk.
yeah. So like, I definitely feel like I strike out whenever I meet my heroes, and it's happened for a long time. You know, so I think when a fan approaches me, I try really hard to make it a memorable and nice interaction, because I'm aware of like what's going on. And it's awkward. It's intense. Like, look, my I was on Yo Gabba Gabba, that kid show. I
Yeah.
loved Yo Gabba Gabba. I knew DJ Lance. I went to go see Yo Gabba Gabba live with my son, and I was like, and my son was so blown away. We were backstage. We got to meet DJ Lance, and I was like, oh, I'm trying to take a picture, and I work my phone all the time. I know how this thing works backwards and forwards. I took that phone out to take a picture. I was like, it wasn't working. I was like, can anyone use my phone? Right? Like, it's like, and that's what I see a lot. It's like, so I just try to make it nice. I am happy when anyone approaches me, as long as everyone's cool. And I have to say, like, in my time, everyone's been exceptionally cool, and there's some people who know me from other things. There's some people who just like, yo, Andre. I'm like, whatever, fine, great. Then there's some people like, hey, what's up? I love you on the Daily Show, which I was never on. I'm like, great. You think I'm Rob Corddry, but awesome. I'm not gonna. The only time it gets awkward, and I never know how to deal with this, is when someone's like, you're familiar. Where do I know you from? And so I'll say, oh, I do a bunch of TV stuff, and they'll be like, that's not it. And now I'm like, well, now you've put me in a tough position because I know I don't know you. I also know my life. I know I run into this a lot. Like, yes, you may not be putting it all together in this moment, but that's where you know me from. You know me from that. And it's like, well, I don't watch TV. I think you went to college with my sister. I'm like, chances are I didn't. Like you know me from this thing. And so that's where it's like, well, tell me what stuff. And then it becomes embarrassing because then it's like I'm looking at you and I'm like, okay, what do I think you've watched? And
See.
then, and then I'm like trying to guess and play into it. And I normally just throw out a bunch of things really rapid fire and then they'll grab onto one of them. But also really the funniest thing, this happened to me the other day. I was at the airport and this woman said to me, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I am such a fan." I said, "Oh, thanks so much." She's like, "I used to watch Best Week Ever every week when I was a kid." And I was like, "Oh, thanks so much." And she's like, "Have you done anything since then?" And I was like, "Have I?" That was my first job, right? Best Week Ever. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, but I mean, but what am I gonna do?" Like, yes, I have, but you don't have to worry about. It's like awkward. I don't know what to do. Like, if you think that that's the you're like, and because I don't want to wreck it. Like, well, you haven't been following my career for the last 20 years. I've arguably done so many more things than that are way bigger. But that's what they know me from. I had somebody who came up to me the other day who said to me, "I am your biggest fan. I've been following you since Family Switch, which is a movie I did last Christmas. It's not even a year old." And right now I'm like, great. I'm like, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I'm psyched that that's what you've been following from. Like, great. And honestly, it's like I don't take any offense to anything. But when I have to list my credits, like there are every, I would say, once a year, there's one person who really digs in. And then I'm just like, oh, we're gonna go for it. Okay, here we go. And it's like, and you list and you list and you list, and then they're like, nope, 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 nope. And I'm like, can you just stop this now? We all know this is awkward. Like, just like let it go. And then I remember that was happening in Chicago. I was like, well, sorry, man, I don't know. And then he
See.
came up to me later. He was like, it what you were right. It was Veep. And I was like, okay, great. Like,
See, it's a mixed bag. See, that's what it is. Like, it's a mixed bag. You never know what you're gonna get from celebrities. Sometimes when you go up to them, but then you also don't know what you're gonna get from fans because it's always gonna be interesting.
I mean, to me, I'm like this. Like, I only am successful because I have people who like what I do, right? So I'm never gonna be a dick. I mean, I may have been quick with people. I may be whatever. Oftentimes, when I'm with my kid, is when I'm probably the most like, it's like I remember when I was carrying my kids around when they were really young. I was like, people are like, can I get a picture? I'm like, well, right now is a little tricky, right? Like I've got my kids in my arm, like I like, but but I try to be as accommodating as possible.
Yeah, I want to get into a little bit of a rapid fire
Sure,
questions.
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, let's what well for your podcast specifically, what remake of a bad movie would you want to change, I guess?
Oh, okay. Like like if I could
Yeah.
remake a bad
If you could
movie, what would
remake
it
a
be?
bad movie, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question because that's where I feel like we should be doing all this sort of stuff. Let me just think really quickly and just see if I can like what comes up in my head. Hmm. I would say uh I would love to remake. Oh man, because now like my brain is like now overwhelmed with like all the stuff that I like and what I don't like. Um, I would like to remake. Sorry, you said rapid
No,
fire,
you're good. You
and
can.
now I'm like, and now I'm gonna do the worst thing, which is of all time, which is well, there's a movie I always go to, which is like Logan's Run, which we've not done on the podcast. Logan's Run to me is an awesome movie that I feel like is just it. I don't know why it missed the mark, but it just did. I'm like, I would love to see a remake of Logan's Run.
Good. Is there a particular actor, director whose work, no matter how strange, always grabs your attention
Oh
when you see
yeah.
their name in a project? If so,
Yeah,
who?
I mean, like, yeah, for me, it's like Edgar Wright, Ari Aster, and honestly, like Martin Scorsese. I look at this guy; he's been in this business for so long, and he makes so much interesting stuff, and he challenges himself. I'm like, oh, I may not love every Martin Scorsese movie, but I'm going to be impressed with see what he does. And I like, so
Yeah.
I'm excited to see that kind of stuff.
And you mentioned your love of memoirs. Are there any favorites you would recommend to readers?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Richard Ayoade, who was on the IT Crowd in London. He's written a bunch of books. They're very funny versions of memoirs. And also Steve Coogan, who does this character called Alan Partridge. He has hilarious memoir. If you like that character, but basically it's like a pompous egomaniac writing a bio, like a memoir. But then more seriously, I've read so many, and I think the ones that really resonate with me, like the ones that like stick out, um, I did love that Paris Hilton book, which was I think really
Okay.
surprising to me, like that one connected with me. I found that to be really a beautiful book. There's a great book that I really recommend, and it's a different type of memoir, but the writers the man was married to Joan Didion. I think his name was like John. He has like three names, but he
Mhm.
does a memoir about trying to write a movie called
Oh,
like Up Close and Personal with Robert Redford and John Griffith Dunn or John Gregory Dunn. I think that's his name, and it's a great memoir of trying to write something in Hollywood, which is it's a beautiful way. And nothing has changed. That book was like written in the '80s, and it's a great look at at the business, which I really really love.
I'll make sure to check that out. What's a bad movie we should watch that you've maybe watched recently, or does any in
Oh
general?
man, well yes, I mean look, if you're looking for action, Stone Cold with Brian Bosworth is a true classic. I think it's a great movie. I also think if you're just looking for like weird, I think that there's a movie out there called The Apple, which is so bizarre. It's like kind of like American Idol meets Running Man. Really interesting movie. And I always recommend to people that you should definitely check out. Like a really funny, underrated film is this movie called Miami Connection about ninjas, cocaine, and Orlando. So I'd highly recommend that.
Okay, and then what's a good movie we should watch, or some good movies you would say?
Oh my gosh, I've been watching a bunch of great movies. I mean, like that's the fun of you know, of like this world in which so many things are coming out is like constantly being surprised by like what's out there. I'm gonna veer for a second and say a show that you should definitely be watching is The Penguin, which I think
Oh,
is
it's fantastic.
brilliant.
Yeah,
It's
that's good.
really great, and I know that's like a limited series, so it doesn't really count. But I also just love like I'm a sucker for things like Rebel Ridge. I just saw that on Netflix the other day. It's like that's a straightforward, like some people say, like a paint by numbers movie, but it's like a First Blood, but it's like done really, really well. And I was like, oh, this is like a fun a movie to watch. So I'm all in for like movies that take chances and movies that are weird. I really love that movie that just came out with James McAvoy, which is Don't Speak, or the one where he's on the poster. It's a weird title. Oh, and I got one more too. It's What's Inside. It's What's Inside is this movie. It's basically like a game where people switch bodies, and the game is to figure out who's in each other's body. It's awesome. It's on Netflix. Really highly
Gotcha.
recommend.
What was your favorite movie that came out this blockbuster summer?
Oh man, that is a great question. I'm trying to think of like all. It was a good summer for
Deadpool.
movies. Of course, was in Twisters. So I'm slightly biased. But there was name one or two that I'm trying to think. I'm like, what else?
Yeah, they had Deadpool. We had
Yeah,
um what's the
it's
one
hard.
that's Colin Hoover book that was a really big. I
Oh
think
right, yeah, all of
yeah,
them, right? Yeah, like
This ends
yeah.
with us that came out.
I think there is some like really
Inside
fun.
Out.
All right, I'm gonna recommend. I really love Trap, which I don't know if that counts. I loved Alien Romulus. I was a big fan of Beverly Hills Cop 4. I'm a big Beverly Hills Cop fan, so to see that it was a real treat for
Oh
me.
yeah, that was good.
And oh, Bad Boys for Life was great. I love those are some of my favorites. I'm a big action. I love those kind of fun big movies, and that really made me psyched.
Perfect. Last question on the rapid fire. You collect a lot of different stuff. What has like been something that's really been something that you really cherish in your collection, and what's something that's very funny or unique that's in your collection?
Oh man, I think unique. I'll go first and say that I have from the movie Tropic Thunder. One of the characters is like the spokesman for like an energy drink called Booty Juice,
Oh
and
yeah.
I have a can of Booty Juice in I have a can of booty juice. I got it from a friend who worked on that movie, so I have an original can of booty juice. A lot of things have like personal like there's small little things that like I that mean a lot to me. So, you know, um I always keep something from set, like something small that reminds me of the character or my time there. But I have a fish from Piranha. I got one
Wow.
of the puppet fish. I got that stowed away. And then when the thing that I think I most cherish are my movie novelizations from when I was a kid. I had them all saved. I have like Beverly Hills Cop 2, the movie novelization, Total Recall, the movie
Wow.
novelization. So I have there's a library collection or like in my book collection, there's a bunch of those, which I love.
Perfect. So the way we end this podcast, we always ask, what should be in a writer's toolkit?
Ooh, like physically or like what do you like?
We usually think about it in terms of skills or what something that's like a unique thing that a writer should have to make them either successful or different or anything in that.
Yeah, you are enough, right? Let yourself be inspired by work, even if your first instinct is to copy that work. Like in a way, like, oh, I want to have the tone. Like if you're like, oh, I love this writing, and I'm going to try to do this, it will eventually become your own. Like I think there are so many things that tell us to stop, right? And oh, I can't do that, I can't do this, I can't. Just follow your passion, like however you get into it. Like if you want to write fan fiction, if you want to write a spec script, like don't let anyone tell you there's no one path. You can't follow anyone's path. People ask me all the time, like, what should I do? I'm like, I can't tell you because my path, I did it. It's already changed now, right? So the biggest thing to me to be a writer is complete it, listen to notes, but only listen to notes from people who are trying to make you better and people who actually give a shit and care. And, know that a note is just a note in the sense that if you don't agree with it, you don't have to take it. No one has the formula, right? You have to feel at the end of the day, you have to feel comfortable and confident in what you do. So edit, take notes, but also at the same time, don't let someone dilute who you are because the only thing that you have is your voice. And I think a lot of the times editing and notes can pull that away, but it's a real balance and it's a real tool to learn how to balance what people want and need, or I guess what people expect versus what they want and need. And that goes back to my book too. I think people may have gone in thinking my book is going to be something like How Did This Get Made?
Yeah.
But I don't know if that would have been the best book. And I think people like wanted that book, but maybe, and this is a lofty statement, people needed this book, right? And I think that that's the difference. And just being open to, I know I've given you a lot of things here, but I think be open to the process. You may start going, I'm writing a fanfic about, Star Wars, and then it becomes a story about a dad and a son, and it just happens to be in space, right? Like allow yourself to change and morph. Like just because the original idea is there, that's your jumping off point, and the writing process tells you what it is.
Yeah, and you see it through your book, and I'm just thankful that you wrote it because it's impacted my life. I'm sure it's impacted other people's lives. So I really do appreciate you writing it.
Well, I really appreciate talking to you, and thanks. And I'm sorry that my rapid fire was slower
No,
than rapid.
no,
It was a slow firing gun. I was musket firing there.
no worries. Thank you, Paul. Let us know what's coming up in your world that we can support or where we can
Yeah.
find you on the internet.
You can find me on the internet in every place where, pretty much there's an internet account. I'm just Paul Scheer. I got a Substack that I occasionally pop into. But I also am on tour, and I'm going to be on tour in November with How Did This Get Made? We're going to be a lot on the East Coast, and then I'm going to be performing improv with my improv group Dinosaur, which is like people like Nicole Byer and Jason Mantzoukas and Lisa Gilroy and Carl Tart and a bunch of really funny, talented people. So fun nights out in DC and Boston and New York and Philly. So come out and see us.
Perfect. We'll make sure to link your book. Thank you, Paul. It's been an
Thank you
absolute
so
pleasure
much. I
talking with you.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.